When starting out in Genshin, the first region you become privy to is Mondstadt, the land of Anemo, and one of the first characters you meet in your journey is Venti, the Anemo Archon, who then accompanies you while you navigate through Mondstadt's Archon quest. Despite his unassuming nature, Venti is one of the original members of the Seven, expectedly containing a lot more power than he lets on. But in the eyes of most townspeople, Venti is just a normal bard with a penchant for inebriation, and he prefers to keep it that way. For us though, having been given the distinct honor of being the first featured 5-star character in Genshin Impact, Venti was one of the most widely used characters in the game because he was the first to receive the spotlight. Since then, he's developed a reputation for being a one-trick pony, someone who within his niche is bar none the most effective character in the game by a substantial margin. However, that greatly contrasts from the other 4 playable Archons who are known more for their versatility and applications in a wide variety of situations. Even so, Venti was a foundational pillar to most Day 1 players' early game experiences, providing no shortage of convenience in overworld and domain exploration. To this very day, he's still the best at what he does, but over the years, the Anemo Archon's tried and true skills have begun to falter against the test of time, and on numerous occasions, even in scenarios he once excelled in, it's debatable whether he's the only one anymore. While even some of the older Archons like Zhongli and Shogun have been aging quite well even through versions 3, 4, and likely 5, Venti has not been doing so well. So today we'll be going through all the factors at play that resulted in his gradual decline from mainstream popularity. I don't think it's that controversial of me to say that of the first 5, Venti is without a doubt the weakest Archon overall. His peaks may be equally as high as the best of them when he gets the chance, but consistency matters far more. As some of Genshin's most popular characters, the Archons are naturally very powerful, epitomizing their respective elements' virtues while at the same time being granted an abundance of privileges, ranging from extended uptime to rotation fluidity and, of course, high parameters. The power budgets afforded to these units are among the most generous in the game. Venti, on the other hand, was given a more modest allowance relative to his colleagues, whether it's because of a lack of foresight or if it was intentional given his more carefree nature and lore. It could have been as a result of being a version 1.0 unit, but at the same time 1.0 has a number of units who are still egregiously overpowered to this day. Though I should say, part of me thinks the Archons were never meant to be as overly broken as they are now. Longtime players may recall the inordinate amounts of backlash thrown at Hoyo shortly after the release of Zhongli, where mainly the Chinese Genshin player base was so outraged by its underwhelming toolkit that scores of complaints and more questionable acts of dissatisfaction were thrown at them, forcing the company to issue the first and only direct buffs to a character. This may have been a driving influence for Raiden Shogun, Nahida, and Furina being the way they are, to avoid the possibility of such an occurrence happening thereafter. Regardless, Venti was the first Archon to be made playable, which might explain the stark differences in capability between him and the other 4 Archons. While he still wholly represents the properties and strengths of Anemo, ironically he's one of the most situational supports in the game, despite Anemo being known for widespread usability. I said before that to this day, Venti was someone who, in the right scenario, was uncontestedly the best character in the game by leaps and bounds. What is that scenario exactly? Grouping. Crowd control is a lesser talked about element of Genshin's combat that frankly I'm surprised is still underexplored now. As an open world action RPG, both characters and enemies are free to adjust their positions in combat, with most non-targeted attacks affecting a certain area. Unless otherwise specified, there's no cap on the number of enemies an attack, skill, or burst can affect at a time, so long as they're within the area of effect, meaning it's in your best interest to squeeze as many of them together as possible for the most amount of damage. The best or rather only way to do this is via grouping, forcibly dragging or displacing enemies to a set area so you can line up your combo and destroy them all at once. While there exists a number of units who can displace enemies to some capacity, the Anemo element is home to the largest number of them, and being the Anemo Archon, it's only natural for Venti to be the elder statesman of the art, and he most certainly is. Wind's Grand Ode maintains itself as one of the strongest elemental bursts in the game in a vacuum. On activation for 8 seconds, he creates a massive vortex in front of him that draws enemies within a wide radius. When they get close enough, smaller enemies are pulled up in the air and suspended for the duration of the burst, while heavier enemies remain in the general vicinity, all while every target receives continuous damage, no small amount either. Tons of base and swirl damage from just the attack alone. With it persisting even after Venti swaps out, it's an outstanding ability overall. Venti's ultimate was, and still is, the selling point for him. 4 years later, we still haven't had a character with the same kind of grouping capabilities that he has. Being self-contained, Venti practically carried all of us through overworld exploration, as the majority of mobs outside of domains consisted of small fry like hilichurls, slimes, wobberflies, and whatnot. Anytime you came across a cluster of mobs, you just press Q and watch everything die in front of you. I can't overemphasize how necessary he was for the first year's Spiral Abyss too. People were begging Hoyo for a Venti rerun at the earliest possible convenience. Speaking of Spiral Abyss, with every cycle there was at least one chamber, usually floor 11 with the Monument Defense one, where you had to deal with hordes of smaller enemies. Those have since become known as Ventiable chambers, owing to how easy they are to clear simply by having him in your party. So while he was a situational character, there were plenty of situations where you could use him to great effect, resulting in him having comparable presence to the other Archons throughout much of versions 1, 2, and even 3. Also, it should be noted that one virtue he possessed was immense, and I emphasize immense area coverage. Spiral Abyss chambers, as you know, are quite large. Even for units with decent area coverage, it can be challenging to get to them all. But if you place Venti's ultimate right in the center, it would typically be large enough to drag everyone towards it. The positives kinda stop there though. Reminiscent of Bennett, Venti is considered a one-button character, someone whose entire value is nested within one ability and one ability alone. Of course, said ability more than gets the job done, but that is a key sore spot with the character that's only worsened over time. Venti Skyward Sonnet possesses a modicum of utility in the overworld thanks to being a large vertical jump on the whole version and having decent range when using the tab version, but otherwise, it's similar to other supports like Bennett or Xingqiu, which only serve to battery his ultimate. As for his ascension passes, A1 is practically meaningless in a combat scenario. It might look like you can use the up current for plunging attacks, but to actually ascend upwards you have to enter a glide, taking a precious attack time. And besides, nothing else in Venti's kit suggests that he supports plunging attacks in any way. A4 is actually not bad since it lowers the energy requirement of his ultimate from 60 to 45, essentially making it very easy to get back up again, not to mention the battery capability it has for the rest of his team. But Venti's kit, like most other version 1.0 characters, leaned more in the direction of a bunch of random things being put together and hoping that they accidentally work well together rather than a concerted effort in doing so. You can see this reflected in his constellations too. C1 gave him more aim shot damage, which is strange to have on a unit with a sub-DPS motif. C2 contained Anemo and Physical Shred, but it was only 24% of each. Furthermore, with half of the amount being locked behind the stipulation that opponents had to be launched upwards, it was half as effective on bosses or lead monsters, the type of enemy that would be most affected by something like this. Even smaller mobs would be dead before you could even take advantage of the res reduction. C4 and C6 are more conducive to his gameplay, but not by enough to warrant going the full distance on a 5-star. Unlike the other Archons, where you can easily tell they were giving them preferential treatment, it felt like Venti was given the same power budget as everyone else at the time. In totality, everything came down to his ultimate. If his ultimate got the job done, he was a hero. If it didn't, he was a zero. Fortunately for him, like I said, throughout the better part of Genshin's timeline, the number of applicable scenarios was sufficient enough to where he was being used in virtually every Spiral Abyss at least once or twice. On paper, synergistically, Venti could fit into pretty much any team since just about everyone benefited from grouping and/or swirl-based effects. Taser, Freeze, most of the popular teams had a spot for him if necessary. So, what exactly happened? The critical weakness of Venti is that since he bets it all on his burst, his deployment value is a yes or no question, whereas for everyone else, it's on a spectrum. It could be 50% efficient, 75, 90, 100, what have you. Venti's either 100 or 0. Well, technically 20 when you account for his damage, but possibly in light of him being such an insta-win back in version 1, Hoyo has since been making abyss chambers and even overworld domains with enemy formations that seemed explicitly designed to stop you from turbo-venting everything. A lot of people turn to Kazuha as a watershed moment for Venti's decline, and while ultimately yes, that played a part, it's not because they did the same thing, rather one just ended up being more valuable over time. Kazuha is objectively the best Anemo character in the game. He's a stable presence in many parties, and is just a very good character overall. What allowed him to stay relevant all these years while Venti has been steadily falling off is because Kazuha has more future-proof stuff. Both of them have the ability to group enemies together. Venti went all in on that department and his own personal damage, while Kazuha went more into buffing and reactions, which ended up doing better long term. He gives tons of damage to himself and his entire party with his A4 passive based on what element he swirls with, and he can further augment his supportive capability with his C2. If your primary goal is crowd control, then Venti will of course be the better choice, but if you're looking for just about anything else Anemo related, Kazuha offers more in those departments, whether faster grouping, more buffs to the party, and overall more general versatility. Kazuha's a lot more resistant to changes in circumstances than Venti. If the former runs into heavy mobs or bosses who can't be grouped, he can still make use of the wide area coverage on Kazuha's Slash and the damage boost on his A4, retaining his value in parties. Venti, on the other hand, gets almost totally shut down in chambers without groups of tiny enemies. He was overpowered back in the day when every floor, including floors 11 and 12, consisted entirely of small enemies. Nowadays, it's exceedingly rare for that to happen. Even for those defense chambers that have waves of enemies, they're either spread across too many waves, at which point Venti's ultimate will only last for the first maybe 1 or 2, and be down for wave 3 and 4, or they will include heavy enemies like ruin mobs or vishaps who are immune to his tornado suck. The situation's reminiscent of Cryo's decline, where Hoyo is adamantly trying to prevent you from being able to turbo freeze everything, thus removing what little difficulty exists in this game. Uptime's also another weak point of Venti. His burst, while strong, is short-lived, making it very committal and therefore punishing if you miss it, as the cooldowns roughly double the duration. If you miss time or misplace it, he loses a ton of air pressure, if you get what I mean. It doesn't help that he auto-aims on the nearest enemy, which means you can't cast it in the center of a bunch of mobs. It's a projectile in that sense. Moreover, because the vortex is fixed into a location, if you're fighting enemies that move around a lot, that's one more thing to worry about, as opposed to more on-demand crowd control such as Kaza's skill, which can be used very quickly, even if it's only a one-time pull and not a continuous drag. The other Archons are touted for their flexibility and consistency above all else. Shogun's uptime on her skill is so high it might as well be a passive at that point. It follows the active character, automatically enhancing their burst damage and dealing supplemental electro damage. Considering elemental bursts are the bread and butter of most damage dealers, she's never not a good choice. And if you endeavor to use her on field, she can rip enemies to shreds at record time. Zhongli's Genshin impact on easy mode. Despite being part of the worst element in the game, his deployment value has never changed, making your party practically invincible to any and all possible threats. He also has a giant meteor that can stun enemies in a large radius, making him one of the few cast members with a form of hard crowd control himself, one that doesn't care about enemy weight, though it still doesn't work against bosses. Nahida is one of the most powerful units in the game. With her hold skill, she can do a 360 no-scope around the map and instantly tag a group of enemies, eliminating the need for you to even group them together since you can chain damage with her mark, killing them remotely, and her burst animation is so big it literally covers the entire chamber. This is all in addition to a near seamless Dendro application, high personal damage, party buffing capability, and so on. It doesn't matter who she fights, they all die. Furina is also one of the strongest supports in the game. She can summon her bubbly trio that randomly attack enemies around you, and unlike most summons, those things will follow you around wherever you go. Then her ultimate gives everyone in her team obscene amounts of bonus damage, making her a fit for any party who can afford a party-wide healer such as Baiju, Jin, Xianyun, etc. In essence, the Archons that came after Venti were designed to work in many situations for many different parties, while Venti was designed to be good at one specific thing. The issue is, said specific thing has been actively worked against over the years. Meanwhile, alternative methods are being implemented that can produce the same end result, even if it's not in the same exact way. For example, crowd control is helpful, but you can also make a character with insane AoE coverage. Case in point, characters like Nahida and Neuvillette, who can spin to win and cover the entire stage. I suppose the same can be said for a shielder like Zhongli, where you can either A, kill everything before they kill you, or B, use the healer, the latter solution having considerably affected his standing in recent years. But Zhongli's parameters are so high, and lest you forget, shields give super armor, that even in spite of alternative methods, he's still such a convenient choice. There hasn't been a single shielder who comes anywhere close to where he's at, and that's probably intentional. With the addition of more heavy enemies, boss-oriented chambers, and combinations of enemies who can ignore his vortex, Venti's beginning to not even be the best option for the very circumstances he was meant to excel at. To be clear, he's still far and away the best at killing wave battles, but all it takes is one or two heavy enemies or even small enemies with a shield or something to utterly negate his effectiveness. Like I said, efficiently speaking, Venti's a character where everything is good or none of it is. There's no in between. The other Archons come equipped with contingencies that make it so any minor hiccup is negligible, but for Venti to function at his best, you have to clear the entire chamber within no more than 2 uses of his burst. The black and white nature of his kit is what makes it difficult to balance him. If the stars align, he farms the out of this game. You just press Q and then rest in sleeper and wake up to everything being dead. People have been asking Hoyo to bring back Ventiable chambers, but you have to understand that if they do that, Venti goes from a 5% pick rate to basically 100%. It's all or nothing for him. Definitely a tough catch-22 to break. It's integral for multiple teams to be equally efficient at clearing floors or domains so as to encourage the use of many characters. But Venti's just so good at what he does that he practically eliminates the need for anything else. That's how big the gap is between him and the rest of the cast when things do go his way. Ultimately though, it's Hoyo's decision on whether or not they want Ventiable chambers, though empirical data suggests that they don't. At the same time, he is an Archon, so perhaps they might throw him a bone in the future. But what do you guys think? Do you believe there's another way Venti can be useful without breaking the meta? Feel free to share in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed that video, a like and subscribe would be very much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Genshin Impact discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.